Ask direct questions. I don't know that they're tough questions per se. I think there are a lot of tough issues that our country is facing.
Does this mandate make sense?
That's the role of Face the Nation, to focus on the issues at hand. That means a civil, contextualized conversation with perspective.
Tonight, how much was already known about George Santos' questionable past before he was elected to Congress? A CBS News investigation reveals a damaging report. Then, as fentanyl takes more American lives, inside an effort to disrupt the supply chain on the CBS Evening News.
They feel the need to attack because they're scared that we will win based on the merit of the work that Joe Biden and I and our administration has done.
I think the 14th Amendment that prohibits someone that is guilty of insurrection, of holding federal public office again, is applicable to these circumstances.
Iowans appreciate when you show up, and they expect you to show up. They expect you to earn it. So that's what we're going to do.
Hello and welcome. I'm Nancy Cordes in Washington. Thanks for joining us on America Decides. President Biden is traveling to India today to meet with world leaders at the G20 summit. CBS News senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe is in India and has the latest on what to expect from the annual gathering.
Well, Nancy, hello from New Delhi. This capital city is in final preparations for this weekend's G20 summit. We've noticed freshly paved roads, fresh coats of paint, and plans for a three-day holiday in hopes of keeping most of this city's 33 million residents off the streets while world leaders gather here. President Biden is set to arrive Friday evening New Delhi time and go right into meetings with the Prime Minister Narendra Modi. They've met about 10 times. Met or spoken 10 times since the president took office, but this will be President Biden's first visit here to India since he moved into the White House. There are some notable absences at this weekend's G20 meetings, however, which is casting some doubt on how effective this organization remains. China's President Xi Jinping won't be here for the first time since he became China's leader, and Russian President Vladimir Putin will not be here either as he prepares to meet with North Korea's leader in the coming days. Also notably absent, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Ukraine isn't a member of the G20, but it was invited last year to address the group virtually when they met in Indonesia. India did not extend an invitation to Zelensky because it remains officially neutral on issues related to the war in Ukraine. But the G20 is a gathering of the world's largest economies, so it's less about war and peace and much more about dollars and cents and issues like global development and infrastructure, a favorite topic, of course, of President Biden. From here, on Sunday, the president heads to Vietnam for meetings with that country's leaders as they seek a closer relationship and strategic partnership with the United States amid the growing threats and provocations by China, especially across the South Pacific. China will remain a major topic of conversation, whether explicitly or in the background, as the president travels across Asia in the coming days. Nancy?
It sure will be. Ed O'Keefe in India, thank you so much. And while President Biden is headed to India, his vice president, Kamala Harris, was in Jakarta, Indonesia this week for the Association of Southeastern Nations Summit. She spoke to CBS News chief foreign affairs correspondent and Face the Nation moderator Margaret Brennan. They talked in a network exclusive interview this morning. And she responded to criticism of her from Republican 2024 hopefuls, and she addressed concerns that some Democrats have about President Biden's age. Here's part of that conversation.
So you're 58 now. If you win a second term, as you and the president are running to do, he would be 86 at the end of it. And we are seeing Republican candidates hone in on you in particular as being next up for that job. Nikki Haley says a vote for Joe Biden is a vote for President Harris. Chris Christie, I want to be clear that I pray every night for Joe Biden's good health, not only because he's our president, but because of who our vice president is. Ron DeSantis, Harris is Biden's impeachment insurance. People know if she were president, batter the doors. As bad as Biden did, it would get worse. How do you respond to all of that?
We are delivering for the American people. And the reality of it is that, unfortunately, very few of those who would challenge our administration actually have a plan for America. You look at what we have accomplished, Margaret. We have created over 800,000 new manufacturing jobs in America, 13 million new jobs, unemployment at record lows. We have capped the cost of insulin for seniors at $35 a month, capped the cost of prescription drugs on an annual basis at $2,000.
They're talking
for
about
seniors.
What you would do as president as being a risk. They're honing in on you. Why do you think that is? How do you respond to those attacks? That's not about policy, that's about you.
Listen, this is not new. There's nothing new about that. I mean, listen, in my career, I was a career prosecutor. I was the first woman elected district attorney of San Francisco, a major city in this country, and reelected. I was the first woman attorney general of the second largest Department of Justice in the United States and reelected. I was a United States Senator. I represented 1 in 8 Americans, and I'm now Vice President of the United States. They feel the need to attack because they're scared that we will win based on the merit of the work that Joe Biden and I and our administration has done.
But even Democrats are worried about the president's age. The Wall Street Journal had a poll showing 2/3 of Democrats say Joe Biden is too old to run again. Are you prepared to be commander-in-chief?
Yes, I am, if necessary. But Joe Biden is going to be fine. And let me tell you something. I work with Joe Biden every day. The work that, under Joe Biden's leadership, our administration has accomplished is transformative. What we have done, for years, administrations talked about what they would do in terms of Infrastructure Week. Remember that? Mm-hmm. Under Joe Biden's leadership, we have transformed and are in the process of transforming America's infrastructure with an historic investment in not only roads and bridges, but high-speed internet, what we are doing around issues like lead pipes, and I could go on and on. What we have done in terms of 800,000 manufacturing jobs, what we have done to cap the cost of prescription medication. Many have talked about doing this. This is the work under Joe Biden's leadership that has actually been accomplished. And I think the American people, most of all, want a leader who actually gets things done. Mm-hmm. And that is what Joe Biden has accomplished.
You can watch more of Margaret's interview with Vice President Harris this Sunday on Face the Nation. And Ashley Etienne joins us now. She is a CBS News contributor, and she's the former communications director for Vice President Kamala Harris and former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. Ashley, great to have you here. How are you? So curious what you make of her response to Margaret's questions as Margaret laid out some very pointed, very personal attacks at the vice president by these Republican contenders. Did she push back forcefully enough?
I mean, I thought she looked strong. I thought she looked comfortable in the role. And that's a big statement. The other thing I noticed too is when asked was she ready, no hesitation. She said, yes, I'm ready.
Well, what's the alternative? What are you going to say? I'm not ready?
No, I mean, you've been in politics as long as you've been covering politics as long as I've been in it, right? And the reality is there's a lot of answers. You could say, well, we have one president at a time, blah, 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 blah. But she leaned in and was very affirmative that she's ready for the job. And I think that that's a big statement for her. And then as we think about why she's being attacked, I worked for Speaker Pelosi, and she used to always say the reason why Republicans are coming for me is because I'm effective. And I think that's the thing with the vice president now. She's finally starting to get her footing. She's finally starting to get more comfortable in the role and also taking more calculated risks that's actually working to the president and her benefit going into this next election. So it's no surprise that they'll continue to attack her. I think the interesting thing will be, what does she throw back at them?
You say she's finally starting to find her footing. We're 2.5 years in. There's this new book out by Franklin Foer that everyone in Washington is reading that really talks about a vice president who has sort of struggled to find her place within the power structure at the White House. Why do you think she has struggled? And what makes you say that things are getting better on that front?
Yeah, I think the reason, I think we don't give her enough credit. She's been the top executive in every role she's ever had. She's been the first in every role she's ever had. It is very hard. I've worked in that building twice now for a president and now, and most recently, a vice president, it is very hard to adjust yourself being the number one to being a number two, and to reconcile your voice with that of another elected official who's been in the business for 40 plus years. That's not an easy task. Secondly, the first 2 years we were all, mired in COVID. That hampered her ability to get out, test her footing, expand her reach and voice and develop her voice in this new role. And I think the third thing is that, women in this business, they just get it harder. Critics are more harsh on them. I think there's a confluence of race and gender that we as a nation haven't started to discuss as it relates to the vice president and her ability to gain power, leverage, and exercise that power. So I think there's a lot of factors, and it's not a one simple, easy answer. Now, you asked me, what are the signs that she's getting her footing? One, I love the fact that she went to Florida and took on DeSantis in this larger issue of whitewashing history, when she took him to task about the books and rewriting history and slavery and all of that.
You think she needs to do more of that?
That was daring, yeah. And the reason why it was so daring, and the reason why it was so effective is because it elevated the issue within their party. Mm-hmm. It smoked out Senator Scott, who then took on DeSantis on this issue of race, which is incredibly effective. Then she went to Iowa and talked about abortion rights, right, in Iowa, right ahead of the Republican debate. And so all of that is risky. And when you're the vice president, that's what you need to do. You need to take calculated risks that are going to benefit the principal.
So you think she does best when she's a little pugnacious from time to time and taking on some hot button issues?
Absolutely. But they're all issues that she has credibility on. She was on the Intelligence Committee. Mm-hmm. She was first, Attorney General, et cetera, et cetera. These are all issues that are very personal to her, that she's got a lot of credibility on, but they also galvanize her base.
Right. But, you look at this new CNN poll that's just out. It finds that 3/4 of Americans, not just Republicans, but all Americans, worry that the president's age is going to affect his mental and physical competence in the job. What does she do to convince people that, A, she's ready, beyond just saying, I'm ready,
sure,
and B, that it's not as big of an issue as Republicans have argued that it could be?
I think she does what she is doing, which is taking those calculated risks on issues that matter to not just Democratic base, but then to marginal voters as well, like abortion, double downing on abortion. She just recently announced that she's going to be doing a college tour. CBS had a poll out recently that said she's performing 60%, or favorabilities 60+% with voters 30 years and younger. That is a huge sweet spot for her that she can exploit that really adds value for the president. So I think that's the way that she does it. She gets out here, she has to take risk, she has to garner media attention, build out her voice a little more, and then just do it over and over and over again with, not at all relenting.
Right. Yeah. Certainly no bigger issue that's animating the Democratic base right now than abortion. So,
well, maybe Donald Trump.
Okay, they're probably tied. Ashley Etienne, thank you so much for bringing your insight today. Appreciate it. And coming up, a law expert breaks down the new 14th Amendment case seeking to prevent Donald Trump from appearing on the ballot in Colorado. You're streaming America Decides.
If it's important to our nation,
I wonder how you think about where America is at this moment.
It's on Face the Nation.
Can there be stability if Vladimir Putin remains in power?
Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan on CBS.
America Decides, taking you inside American democracy.
The most important stories on a day-to-day, hour-to-hour basis.
You're going to hear a lot of reporting.
It is clearly a pivotal moment.
Gun control, the economy, education.
Both sides of the political aisle fight it out for power.
Bringing you the analysis that you need.
Thoughtfully, with context.
Be part of the conversation.
On CBS News Streaming.
Welcome to America Decides.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
I always tell people that Twitter would not be Twitter without Black Twitter. It's just us being in fellowship with each other.
And it becomes a conversation you don't want to be left out of.
People really started to recognize the power of activism on Twitter.
Based on that one tweet, the hashtag #OscarsSoWhite was trending around the world.
If anything has really powered Black Twitter, it's been humor.
If your food ain't right, we're going to tell you about that too.
We tend to create change, create culture and cool.
That's how movements happen on Black Twitter and go beyond more than that.
Black Twitter, the Twitterverse that changed a generation. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
When weather turns extreme.
The threat of severe weather and dangerous tornadoes is expected to last.
CBS News and the Weather Channel bring you virtual weather technology. So advanced, so real.
Let's bring in our partners at the Weather Channel.
Now 6 feet of water, imagine that. Cars that can act like battery lamps.
These hyper-realistic simulations show you what the weather will look and feel like before it happens.
Feel the forecast. Streaming on CBS News.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
The carnage in our nation's schools has become painfully repetitive.
Now one more child!
School shootings have parents fighting mad.
I promised my daughter I was going to fight. It's going to keep on happening.
And teachers taking lessons in how to fight back.
This is an exercise.
We approach it as it's you or them.
It shouldn't have to be your teacher's job to protect your life.
But will the battle over gun control,
People are afraid that they're going to lose their gun rights altogether,
be the hardest lesson of all?
The exercise, you're having to shoot at an adult. Are you prepared to have to kill one of your students?
Guns in the Classroom, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
She's the most successful alpine skier, male or female, ever, and a worldwide inspiration.
We need a lot of women doing sports really, really well.
The story of Michaela Schifrin's game-changing reign at the top of the slopes when we go person to person.
Welcome back to America Decides. The government watchdog group Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, commonly known as CREW, has filed a lawsuit to bar former President Trump from appearing on presidential ballots in Colorado. The case claims that Trump should be disqualified from running due to Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. It's a post-Civil War provision that bans insurrectionists from holding public office. Lawrence Tribe joins us now with more. He's a law professor at Harvard Law School. Professor Tribe, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, Nancy, for having me.
Absolutely. Now, part of the reason that this has emerged into the public consciousness is because of an article that you co-wrote about the 14th Amendment this summer. And so I'm so glad you're here to help us break it down and understand it, because while it was something that was being discussed in Democratic circles and some conservative circles as well, now there are lawsuits and there are secretaries of state in states across the country saying this is an issue. So it's clearly here to stay. So help us understand exactly what the 14th Amendment says and why you believe that it may disqualify the former president from office.
I'm glad to do so, Nancy. I co-wrote that article with a very conservative, distinguished former federal judge, Judge Michael Ludig. We concluded, as have all the scholars who have seriously studied this issue, that the language of the 14th Amendment means exactly what it says. It says that anyone who takes an oath to protect the American Constitution and holds office and then engages in an insurrection against the Constitution or gives it aid and comfort can never again hold office in the United States. That language is unambiguous. It's clear. Whether it applies to Donald Trump will have to be decided by states like Colorado. And when they decide, then the U.S. Supreme Court will almost certainly have the final word, and it will come quickly. The reason we believe that this language applies, apart from all the facts we know about, is that it was put in the Constitution at a time when everyone realized that the executive branch would be unlikely to get convictions against former insurrectionists, because the president at the time was Andrew Johnson, who wanted to dismantle the Union victory in the Civil War. But it was going to be a permanent provision, a permanent protection against turncoats, people who turned against the country. If they weren't prosecuted, or if they were acquitted rather than convicted, or if they were pardoned, it wouldn't make any difference, because an independent determination would be made that they were disqualified. This lawsuit, brought in Colorado by Citizens for Responsible Ethics in Washington, representing 6 Colorado voters who clearly have standing to bring the suit, is the strongest of many around the country. It's brilliantly researched, thoroughly developed. The president is clearly frightened of it because he made a motion today, a frivolous motion, to take it to federal court where he obviously hopes to get it dismissed. He's scared of this suit, and he should be. Because it is,
he just said today, in fact, he was doing a radio interview. He called it a trick that amounts to election interference. And, there is a question about whose decision it is, who gets to decide whether he meets this standard or not, especially because he has not formally been charged with inciting an insurrection. He's been charged with a lot of things, but not that. And he certainly hasn't been convicted of anything yet. And I hear what you're saying about convictions not necessarily being a bar that has to be met. But if there are no convictions, who is it that decides at the end of the day that the Republican frontrunner should be barred from serving as president?
Well, in the first instance, secretaries of state have to decide. Whichever way they go, whether they say that maybe he's an insurrectionist, but we want it to be left to the people, even though the Constitution says that they are disqualified, the same way that, Barack Obama or George W. Bush or, Bill Clinton, they might all be very popular, but they can't run because they're disqualified, having been president twice. This guy might be disqualified because he tried to overturn the very Constitution he pledged to protect. When it's decided one way or the other by secretaries of state, that will go up to the U.S. Supreme Court. They will be in quite a pickle because a majority of them, I think, are, either beholden to him or quite right-leaning, but they are also pledged to uphold the Constitution. If they decide that he is eligible to run, they'll have to explain why. And we'll all be interested in hearing that explanation, given the clear language of the 14th Amendment.
We certainly will be interested, and I think we're going to be talking about this a lot more over the next year. So, Lawrence Tribe, I really appreciate you coming on and breaking it down for us.
Thank you, Nancy.
All right, coming up next, Ron DeSantis is betting big on Iowa. We'll explain next. You're streaming America Decides.
An original documentary from CBS reports. Controversial Congressman George Santos.
Why won't you answer our questions?
How did he manage to get elected?
Thank you very much, and God bless you, and God bless the USA.
George Santos' campaign was a campaign of deceit, lies, fabrication.
And who is he, really?
I knew him as Anthony DeVolder from Queens.
Really, who he is, he's a fraud.
I compare him to the Tinder swindler.
From people who know him, the truth, the facts, the lies.
He would say that he was worth $100 million.
It's an incredibly cynical episode in American politics, beyond satire.
Had you ever seen anything like this?
No, and I hope I never see it again.
Campaign of Deceit, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
She dazzled on the court and off the court as a businesswoman.
Thank you for joining us on Person to Person. Tennis superstar and entrepreneur Serena Williams.
an original CBS Reports documentary.
I asked my students, what are we going to do about racism in the United States?
The backlash over teaching about racism in American schools.
I don't think it has any place in the classroom.
We can either pretend and say, no, we're not racist and we're all great people, or we can actually start to do the really, really hard work of addressing it.
How did you lose your job? I made the statement that white privilege is a fact.
Is it helping diversity and inclusion?
When you bring in different people's stories and experience, it enriches education.
If you don't talk about something, it doesn't go away.
Or driving us further apart?
What schools are doing to our children in the name of anti-racism is in fact teaching them racism.
The intention is to put us in this war against each other.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now. An original CBS Reports documentary.
I was entitled to equal pay for equal work under the law.
Does the Supreme Court's power need to be checked?
9 Supreme Court justices, 5 of them said no, she's not entitled. That's not right.
Calls to fix the court tend to go along with the politics of the moment.
Republican-appointed justices have all tended to go in one direction, with the Democratic-appointed justices tending to go in another.
Even though it's only 9 justices, it takes 5 of them to make the law of the land.
Does it have political impact? True. Political intent? Probably not true.
If the American people don't trust the judgment of their court, that's a real problem for our democracy.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now.
On our places, bright shiny faces.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my 2 good friends, and we talk about the world.
Appreciate when you show up, and they expect you to show up. And they expect you to earn it. So that's what we're going to do.
Welcome back to America Decides. Shakeups and polling struggles have defined Florida Governor Ron DeSantis' campaign for the last few months. Now CBS News is reporting that DeSantis is going all in on Iowa. CBS News political reporter Aaron Navarro joins us now. He is the author of that new report. So, you know, not necessarily surprising, Aaron, that a political candidate would be focused on Iowa. What is different about the DeSantis strategy?
Well, it seems like they are really honing in on the grassroots operation and are planning to really lean on it to try and find success in Iowa. They say that this is the same method that Ted Cruz used to narrowly win, beat Trump by about 4 points in 2016. Rick Santorum also did, the quote-unquote full Grassley, a tour of every county in Iowa, which DeSantis is doing. But it's really building grassroots support, and it's what DeSantis' campaign, his allies think, will separate him from the rest of the field and Trump, in part because they have the funds to do so.
And what does their grassroots operation look like in Iowa right now? Because obviously early on, he had tons of money. The super PAC had tons of money. They hired all of these people.
Right.
Then they had to pull back. They had to let people go. What does their operation look like in Iowa compared to some of the other campaigns?
That's right. Well, the Super PAC has 5 offices spread out across Iowa, 20 staffers. It's definitely a reinvestment for them. And they cut, as you mentioned, they cut door knocking in Nevada and some Super Tuesday states in part to reinvest in the first 3 states.
Mm-hmm.
They have this Commitment to Caucus card program that they say that they've gotten 12,000 Iowans to sign on to. And how they follow up with voters is not really known, but it's a sign to them that they were building a base of support for the caucus next January. But on the top line approach, it's that bus tour. It's DeSantis always being in the state, and the allies, the campaign, are ready to make that contrast with Trump, who goes infrequently. He goes for the Iowa State Fair at this upcoming Iowa versus Iowa State game, but not as much as DeSantis.
Right. He's been a little absent lately. I want to ask you about Nikki Haley because of all the candidates, she's almost been the most aggressive about talking about not only Joe Biden's age, but also his vice president. Let's take a listen to what she's had to say recently, then I want to ask you about it.
But what has Congress done for you lately? Nothing. Don't you think it's time we finally have term limits in this country? It's the same reason why I think we have to have mental competency tests for anyone over the age of 75. We all know young 75-year-olds, and we know Joe Biden. The point I'm trying to make is these are people making decisions on our national security.
Is this a winning issue for her?
Well, it's interesting because no other candidate is really willing to talk about age in the same way Nikki Haley has. We were talking about DeSantis earlier. He has said, we'll let the voters decide when he's asked if he'd support the mental competency test. But we're seeing Haley, especially after the debate, start to make some traction in the polls, kind of knock on DeSantis's door. And in part because she has established herself as the candidate that talks about these things. And term limits especially have been popular across the aisle for in poll results for American citizens. So, and there's also that subtext of the conversation of a Biden-Trump rematch and these two very old politicians going against each other. So far, in the polling bump she's getting after the debate, it seems like it is working.
A lot of lawmakers in Washington are in their 80s themselves, so it's hard to see them imposing some kind of age requirement on the president and the vice president. It'll be interesting to see whether at some point Vice President Harris ends up taking on Nikki Haley after the things that Haley has been saying about her.
And we saw earlier in the show, the clip you showed of the interview with Margaret, that, Kamala Harris, the vice president, isn't really quite ready to go after the candidates yet. No. Maybe some shots with Ron DeSantis and talking about education there, but it'll be something to watch if she does go after Haley.
Clearly, the message seems to have gone out on the Democratic side. Hold your fire for now.
For now.
There'll be time to go ahead and take them on. Aaron Navarro, a political reporter for CBS News, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for
Appreciate it. And that does it for today. You can stream America Decides Monday to Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern. Thanks for watching. You're streaming CBS News. See you next time.
It's a history-making meeting. 4 extraordinary women who are all 4-star generals and admirals.
How did you deal